All right, this is really weird, but there's like this YouTube thing going around this month of No Edit November. So I'm going to give it a try and I'm going to do an unedited review of this movie I actually just saw called Barbarian, this horror film that came out actually in September. Very, very strange that it showed up on HBO Max in October. And I just want to say before I start, this is so weird. Like I would usually have like cold opens in my videos and I would do that, try to hook people in, and then do like a thumbnail, and then I would start the video probably right here. And this is just very strange, but I think it also could be kind of fun to sort of see how these reviews usually go. If I screw up, I'm keeping it in. All right, I went to film school, so a lot of times when I do these reviews, I'm like directing myself in my head, and sometimes I'll cut something and like do another take or, restart. And we're not going to do that. We're just going to jump in talking about Barbarian. So I have actually been watching more and more horror movies over the last few years, mostly because of Jordan Peele's Get Out, which sort of broadened what I thought horror movies were. So I was like mostly like slasher, like Freddy, Jason, like that kind of stuff, Hellraiser, those kinds of movies. And Jordan Peele kind of introduced me to more of like the psychological side of horror films, which I was like, okay, I like this. I like this. So Barbarian, I think, actually plays into a little bit of both. And the first reason for that being is that this film does something that I really like when horror movies do, which is where they essentially, I'm just going to step a little bit closer. How's this look? Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to do this. I would have edited that whole thing out. This is so weird. But one of the things Barbarian does is that there's a lot of creepy things happening in the background of this movie, right? So anytime a character, it's basically where I'm standing right now, there would be something weird happening behind me. When I make my videos, I kind of like to do this comedy in the background. That's why I have this little sign right there, which is an important sign to remember. But in a movie like Barbarian, which I almost forgot the name, God, this is gonna be. I don't know if I'm gonna do this more than once, like this type of video, but we're gonna stick with it. In a movie like Barbarian, there's a lot of like weird things happening. You have to be paying attention to what's going on in the background of a movie like this. And aside from that, I just want to say that this is an extremely like silly movie. Like there is a lot in the horror genre where the genre sort of needs dumb characters. Like you have to be sort of dumb to be a character in a horror movie. And the main character in this film is like really dumb. Like she shows up going to this house in an incredibly rundown neighborhood of Detroit. And after the first night, she wakes up in the middle of the night and the door to her bedroom is already open. Right? I guess essentially the premise of this film, without spoiling too much, is that this woman shows up to an Airbnb and there's somebody already staying there. And they're both saying that they each booked the Airbnb. It's apparently double booked. She decides to stay with the guy. Either way, he sleeps on the couch, she sleeps in the room. When she wakes up in the middle of the night, bedroom door is open. She goes out to the living room. This guy's like thrashing around, like screaming in his sleep and all that sort of stuff. And usually, in this scenario, you would think like, all right, well, this is weird. I'm actually just gonna head out. Like I'm gonna go back home because this is fucking strange. I'm gonna go rent a hotel, something like normal, have a normal reaction. But she goes to her job interview or whatever the next day, and then goes back to the house like after all this crazy stuff happened the night before. So right away, you're just instantly like, you kind of deserve whatever happens to you at this point. Like you've chosen your fate. You've chosen that you do not care if you don't make it through this trip. And from there, the story gets more and more insane, but in like the best possible way. Like it sort of feels like this film is being written in a way where they start throwing out crazier and crazier ideas of like, how can we take this to an even more insane place? And they just run with it, which I love because there are some sort of supernatural elements to this story, which sort of get meshed in as things go along. But there's also just a lot of like conventional horror stuff in this film that makes it so uncomfortable. Like a lot of like small spaces and tunnels and darkness, just like a lot of darkness on the screen. There's a lot of like things that they don't explain, which are also make this movie even weirder. I also wanted to say, Justin Long in this movie is fantastic. He's so good. And I have not seen him in anything in a very long time, even though he was in literally every movie when I was like a kid, like in the early 2000s. And in this movie, he's great. He's so good. He plays this absolute giant douchebag of a character who's sort of having this existential of like, am I a good person who did one bad thing? Or am I actually a bad person who's going to keep doing bad things to people? And his character in this film is great. His acting is fantastic. Bill Skarsgård is in this movie. The guy who played It, the guy who played Pennywise, he's in this movie. Just a great cast. The main actress, I do not remember her name. And I guess I could look it up because I'm not going to edit any of this out anyway. But she was also good, even though she was really, really dumb. I think one of the things that's puzzling about a film like Barbarian, and I think I'm a little bit worried that this might become more of a trend, sort of as the movie industry changes, is how briefly this film was in the theaters. This movie was in the theaters for like maybe a month, maybe less, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks. Sort of like this film that came out with BJ Novak called Vengeance, a movie that was in the theaters for literally maybe 2 weeks before it showed up on Peacock. And this movie shows up on HBO so soon after it comes out in theaters, and it just like part of me sort of feels like as a moviegoer, you're kind of now put in a weird position of like, is this going to start happening more and more often where like I would have spent the $20 on Barbarian to go see it in the theater, and then 3 weeks later come to find out I could have just watched it on HBO when it comes out on streaming. But usually you're thinking like, okay, a few months are going to go by, then eventually this movie shows up on Netflix or HBO or Hulu or something like that. So I think, I enjoyed this movie a lot, and I'm like kind of surprised to see a film this good, especially in the horror genre, which just has a very dedicated fan base. Usually horror fans will go see most horror movies and then have very aggressive opinions on whether or not it was scary or classifies as a horror movie. And that's one of my favorite things about the horror genre, is that almost anything can be classified as a horror movie nowadays because it isn't a one-dimensional genre. And if you put it in a one-dimensional genre, that's not how it's meant to be interpreted, because fear is completely subjective. So what's scary to you might not be scary to somebody else. And a film like this, I think, preys on that perfectly. And I just hope that we get more movies like this. I think that it's fun to see a movie that is somewhere between an original horror film and a horror film heavily influenced by some recent horror movies that have come out over the last few years. And, for me, Jordan Peele is like totally spoiled me because I'm like, every movie should be completely original. But there's a reason you only have like one Jordan Peele, and there's a reason there are a finite amount of directors and writers and people in the industry who routinely just seem to be able to come up with the weirdest, most original ideas. I think that overall, this is a great idea for a horror movie, what ends up happening in this film. But there are definitely some elements where you're like, okay, I know where they're pulling this from, I know where they're pulling that from. And I will say on that note, they're pulling from great movies. So to me, I don't have a problem with that. If you're pulling from movies that I thought were fantastic and really well done, then it just shows that you also have great taste in movies, and I like that kind of stuff. I highly recommend Barbarian if you're into the horror genre. It is absolutely insane. This movie goes in such a ridiculous direction, like right up until the end of the movie. It starts out sort of creepy and uncomfortable, and then just gets more and more insane until the credits roll. And it's another one of these movies, much like Nope, where I'm still thinking about it. I watched it about a week ago. I'm still thinking about it, and I love that feeling. That's what makes me love film. That's what makes me love television. Something ends, and you're still thinking about it long after the credits roll. So if you get a chance and you have HBO Max, or you find a movie theater that still somehow has Barbarian playing in it, go give this movie a shot. Thanks for watching.